And I want to take you now to Chicago, where we have a friend of Jimmy Carter standing by. Jill Wine-Banks is the first woman to serve as U.S. General Counsel of the Army under President Jimmy Carter, a former Watergate prosecutor and the author of The Watergate Girl. And she is in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So it must just be overwhelming hearing all of these tributes pouring in from around the world as a close connection of President Carter's. How are you feeling today?
Of course, I'm very sad, but I take comfort in his last words about the good life that he led, that he lived a full and wonderful life. He has been, for the last 40 years, a world presence in terms of peace and democracy and free and fair elections. And I feel that his decency is something we really need now, and that remembering it in this way is probably good for our country.
And you're wearing a special pin today to honor Jimmy Carter. Tell us all about that.
I am. Today's Jill's pin says justice, mercy, humility. And one of my followers on social media had sent it to me a long time ago, and I never wore it. When I thought about his character, it seemed to symbolize everything that he stood for. He did so much for the world, and particularly, let me speak not just as the first woman general counsel of the Army, but as someone who saw him do so much for women in the military. He helped to eliminate the Women's Army Corps, which held back women because there were only 2 generals allowed in the WACs. Whereas in the regular Army, which women were not part of until the elimination of WACs, there were many, many generals. And so that he opened the doors of opportunity to women in the military and in combat. He opened a lot of military occupational specialties that had been closed to women. He did it on the basis of if you had the right training and skills, you could hold the job. It didn't matter what your gender was. He appointed a number of women to top positions in his administration, enough women that we were able to form a group called the Old Girls Network to help support each other. So he did a lot for the world, and much of which was criticized at the time, but which in retrospect turned out to be all the right things.
Yeah, and during that term, you were there as the U.S. General Counsel of the Army during some pivotal moments as well, the conflict in Iran in the late 70s, as well as the peace deal with Egypt and Israel. What do you think is going to be his defining moment as president?
Well, the Camp David Accords, of course, are world-shattering and will be remembered for a long time. The Panama Canal Treaty, which is now being discussed because President-elect Trump is saying he wants to take over the canal, was a very good thing to do. It was, we had a 100-year lease that President Roosevelt had negotiated to build and control the canal. It was expiring, and Jimmy Carter had the presence of mind to say, if it expires and we don't negotiate something, we will have no rights. And he negotiated things like, based on his naval experience, the right for our naval ships in time of need to get priority and passage through the canal. Those are things that were very valuable at the time he negotiated this treaty and remain so. The canal is very well managed now, and we are not being treated unfairly. No country is being treated unfairly.
Well, and Donald Trump even just recently was criticizing Jimmy Carter for giving over the canal to Panama. And yet, just in reaction to his passing, he said that he acknowledged the challenges that Carter faced, and he did what he did to improve the lives of Americans. What is it like for you to see kind of a bipartisan response to his passing?
I'm very happy to see that. He is a man who really is the model of decency and bipartisanship, which unfortunately in America we have diminished to the point of it not being meaningful anymore. I hope we can return to the decency and the bipartisanship that he was part of, because it really made our country more powerful. And I admire him. I thank him for all his service, both as president, but also as a past president who did so much going around the world to oversee elections, to make sure they were free and fair, to bring about democracy in other countries. He has done so much in his post-presidency, and the Carter Center will continue to do all that work.
Not to mention his work with Habitat for Humanity and his work to try to end disease around the world. What do you think his biggest legacy will be outside of being president?
I think outside of being president was what he did both before and after. I mean, he's a man who was governor of his state, then was president, but then for an even longer period of time has been contributing to the country. You mentioned Habitat for Humanity, where he actually went out and helped to build housing for those in need. I can see now pictures of him using a saw. He was a person who really did help the world. And I think that he will be remembered as this great humanitarian, a great supporter of democracy. And as I said, right now in America, as we face a new transition, we need that sense of decency and of his never giving up. He worked until the very end. He was in hospice for over a year, for almost 2 years. And until the very, very end, he kept contributing to America and kept supporting democracy and free and fair elections. He spoke up on those issues, and I hope that his words will be remembered, and that what the Carter Center has said his last wish was that in lieu of flowers, people should donate an act of service to our country. And that is who Jimmy Carter was, and I hope that people will do that and will continue to contribute to keep our democracy going.
Jill, he's such a larger-than-life figure, and we've talked so much about all the things that he did on the world stage, all these world leaders weighing in. But as someone who kind of knew him personally and privately, what was he like away from all the cameras?
He was, he eliminated all the pomp and circumstance that Richard Nixon had put into office. At first, he even said, "I don't want Hail to the Chief played when I enter a room." But the outcry against that was so significant. People really wanted the president to have pomp and circumstance, at least as far as Hail to the Chief. But one of my last memories of him was his son moved to Evanston, which is the town I'm in, and there was a wedding, and Jimmy and Rosalind came to Evanston and hosted a dinner at a local pizza parlor. That's who they were. They were comfortable sitting in a local pizza parlor in jeans and flannel shirts. They didn't need all the fancy restaurants that Chicago offers. So I think that really captures who he was and who he is.
Certainly does. All right, Jill, well, thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you.
Jill Weinbank's joining us from Chicago.